If you can hear me, raise your hand. Okay, good. I'm going to go ahead and start. Reason I put it as my three wars is because I mentioned that Vietnam is the gift that keeps on giving. And I found that it wasn't just the combat, but afterwards I wound up with a good heavy dose of PTSD, and that was pretty exciting. And then 14 years ago, had cancer from Agent Orange and almost died. So that was another chapter in the book. So basically, I've been experiencing Vietnam, the gift that keeps on giving. This is how I started out in the war. I was too early to be drafted in World War II, but I was born during World War II, 1945, and I lived in the Bronx for 5 years. And I think the Bronx was good preparation for combat. You learn things in New York City that are important. I started out, I got my draft notice while I was in college. I had been pre-med in college, and I was carrying 18 units and working full time. So I was smart, but not very wise, because one of my classes I had to drop, and then if you had below 12 units or something like that, you get your draft notice. So I got drafted. I went to the recruiter, and he gave me two choices. He saw that I was a hospital corpsman, or he saw that I was a pre-med major. And so he told me, well, let's see, we can make you a barnacle scraper or a hospital corpsman. And it turns out there is no actual designation of barnacle scraper. I think bosun's mates might do it, I'm not sure. But anyway, I told him, well, I don't like barnacles, but I really don't want to go to Vietnam. And he said, oh, no problem. You'll be in a ship somewhere or in a hospital. And I said, okay, sign me up. So I spent my first, it was 15-week course in Navy Hospital Corps School. And this was my platoon, or I think they called it a company at that time, but I'm in the back row there. You can see me. The turnout of that is I was the top kid in the class, and so I was called Honor Man. And I posted a picture of me getting ready to go to Camp Pendleton, because they sent me orders to go to Camp Pendleton with the Marines. So I wound up in what they call a Devil Dock school. The Marines are called Devil Docks, and the corpsmen, the Marines are called Devil Dogs, and the corpsmen are called Devil Docks. And so this was Fleet Marine training at Camp Pendleton. I believe it was 5 weeks. And you basically do all the same stuff that you do in Marine combat training, but you have a shortened version. So you do everything, but not as much time in it. This was me getting ready to go to ship off to Vietnam. This is my wife, Charlene. You probably know her. I was 22 and excited to go to Vietnam. Here's what they told us about Vietnam. Welcome to the sunny tropics of Vietnam. Live entertainment. They go down, fireworks displays, tent accommodations, miles and miles of hiking trails, leech therapy, and free helicopter rides, all at the courtesy of Uncle Sam. But it didn't turn out that way. This was my first job. When I got to Vietnam, I was in charge of the honeypots. And those of you that have been in the military will know what this is. And you had to pour diesel fuel and light them and stir them. I didn't do any stirring. I would just take 3 Marines and say, you, and you, go stir those pots. So that was at least, I didn't have to get up close and personal with that. The Marines are called grunts. The ones that are in infantry, their MOS is designating that their field, infantry, and they use the term hump. And what the hump was is humping a big pack. And this is not the kind of pack I had, but it shows you what they would carry. It's 60 or 70 pounds of stuff. I managed to get a little bit less than that, but basically I had my corpsman kit and a pack, and the weapon I carried most of the time was a 45. The first thing I got there, they had warned me, don't get this battalion 19, and guess what? I arrived at Da Nang and then to Dong Ha, which is up near the border of Vietnam, the Demilitarized Zone. And this was the first assignment. This was called Con Tien. The translation of the Vietnamese word is the place of angels. And they trucked us up about 5 miles from the base, and at night we had to walk the rest of the way. So as we're getting closer, we're seeing all these flares and tracer rounds and occasional explosions, and I thought, well, great, this is going to be exciting. The thing we got into incoming was a regular thing at Con Tien, and I mentioned that at Con Tien, our battalion has the record of the most shelling on a small hill. That was, I think it was like 200 to 300 rounds a day average. And one day we had 1,300 rounds of enemy artillery, mortars, and rockets. This picture is from the perimeter, and that's my bunker, and that's me on the left with a helmet. Now this was kind of unusual. A reporter was standing up while we were taking shelling, and I thought it's not very smart of him. But then later when I saw my picture in the Stars and Stripes, I thought that was pretty genius photo that he got there. So this is one of the reasons that I sent for this picture. I went to, I wrote to the Stars and Stripes, and they sent me the original photo back. And so I scanned it in, and basically the problem is that the platoon I was assigned to, most of them were killed in the later battle that we went to, Battle of Khe Sanh. But these were some of the guys that were in my platoon. We would have incoming, and basically the first thing you've got to do is find a place to jump, or you don't run during incoming because of the shrapnel can just travel along the ground. So you've got to get down into a hole or a trench or something, and you jump in the trench even if there's a couple of guys already in it. And they probably don't appreciate it, because then they try to squirm to get below you if you get below them. So there's this squirming thing that's going on. And that was pretty much almost a daily thing to have incoming. We could hear artillery, even if it was 10 miles away, you could hear, a bump, bump. They would fire 2 rounds at us, and a few seconds later, the rounds would hit. Mortars are much closer, so you'd have maybe 6, 8, 10 seconds, depending on how far away they were. And rockets, if you could hear it, you were in good shape because they traveled faster than sound. So at least you were out of it. But this is the typical position during incoming and being in a trench all the time. I got this picture because it showed a round exploding. This is not artillery. Well, it could be artillery, but it's probably a white phosphorus round. And the white phosphorus is a thing that burns at really high temperatures, and it's different than shrapnel. But to give you the idea that when something explodes, it goes in all different directions. And I was reading where a large artillery shell, the kill zone is 50 yards. So half the length of a football field, that shrapnel could be traveling across the ground. And then I think they said at 100 yards, it's potential to be wounded. So that was pretty nasty. During that time, most of the coverage in Life and Time and in Newsweek were in the battles that I was involved with. This Contien is famous in the Marine Corps, and so there was a lot of reporters out there taking pictures. So there's articles that I was able to save. I found these magazines later. When we got sent out into the bush, that was mostly just, you know, you hike part of the day, and then you camp at night, cook your meals at lunch and breakfast. But you basically are just going through rice paddies and jungle, you know, whatever the terrain is. This to show you just the a single meal on the left. And I wrote ham and limas because this package of food, they call them sea rations. The one that I seemed to like the best was ham and limas, and nobody else liked them because they had a bunch of grease on the top. But I would just scrape off the grease and pour some hot sauce in and maybe crumble up the crackers. And I could always get a trade from a guy who didn't want his ham and limas. I could get an extra can of peaches or something because they didn't like them. So, and I put this in to show you the contrast. Did you hear about that cruise ship that got stranded for 5 days? Must have been tough. So basically, being out in the bush is the worst because you're usually too hot or too cold or too wet or something. And in addition to the danger from ambushes and whatever, you've got all the living conditions. And next we were going to the Battle of Khe Sanh. Now Khe Sanh is famous in the Marine Corps. It's the longest battle of the war and one of the bloodiest. And basically, this was a shot taken from Newsweek magazine. I think the second day we were there, they hit our ammo dump and blew up about 60% of our ammo that was for artillery and everything else. And that ammo kept cooking off for about 2 or 3 days. So a round might be blown out and then explode. So it was kind of exciting. The runway, this is a picture of the Khe Sanh runway, and down here to the bottom right and all the way actually off the screen, you can't see, is where our battalion was positioned. And the planes would come in, and if you notice the hills and mountains around us, there's where the enemy was, dug into caves and stuff, and they were shelling this hill by day, and then at night there would be ground attacks. But this airstrip was so dangerous that planes would come in, and by the time we neared the end of the siege, they had to stop flying in because the side of the airstrip was like a junkyard of planes and helicopters. One plane that was hit had 40 Marines were killed on it. And so basically, anytime you had to go to get away from Khe Sanh, you had to get on a plane or a helicopter. And about 6 months into my tour, I wound up getting R&R right in the middle of the siege of Khe Sanh. So I had to go down to the airstrip, and there was a C-123 plane that came in, but he didn't want to stop because it was too dangerous. So he slowed down, flipped around at the end of the runway down here on the bottom right, and kicked off a big cargo of a big pallet on a slider, and that would just slide off, and the back end of that plane was still down, and you had to run to get on that plane because in the meantime they're trying to shell it with mortars. And so that was pretty exciting. You're looking out the back of the door of this plane, and there you see rounds falling, and getting closer and closer to you. So I managed to get to R&R in Hawaii. I met Charlene in Hawaii. But as you can imagine, after being in this place for a month, I was pretty jumpy. So if I heard a noise or something, on occasion, I pulled Charlene down into the gutter with me. And that was a pretty jumpy time. Well, I got back to the rear, and typically the corpsman was to rotate out to the rear after 6 months instead of being on the front lines. Well, I had a run-in with the one of the chief petty officers, and he was supposed to go take my place in Vietnam, I mean in Quezon, and he managed to get my orders changed. Instead of him going there, he sent me back out. So I had another 6 months out on the front line. So wherever the battalion aid station was, that's where I wound up. Artillery, it just shows everything is loud in Quezon and Con Thien. There's artillery going out. There's artillery coming back in. The B-52s, I wrote down here, every 90 minutes around the clock, 3 planes would drop a full load. And at night, it lights up like daytime. So it's pretty amazing. And while you're in that bunker, it's bouncing like worse than any incoming that gets close by, because these 100-pound bombs are larger than most of the artillery. And they're having hundreds of them at one time that are just rumbling like the biggest earthquake you've ever heard and the loudest noise you've ever heard. So you're still in the fetal position, even though it's your own heroes up in the air that are dropping. We had at some point, the enemy kept moving closer to us because the B-52 bombing was becoming effective. And so they kept moving closer and closer. And so the bombing kept moving closer and closer. And one time they allowed it to go within a quarter mile, and that was really exciting. At night is when the ground attacks would take place. They would probe the perimeter at different spots, try to see how strong how strong our tracer rounds were, and how much return fire they got. So they would try different places. And we used to listen to Hanoi Hannah on the radio. She was broadcasting from North Vietnam, and she would say, "Hello, boys," and she would know your battalion. She would say, "Hello, Colonel Mitchell. Tonight we're going to hit you on the east side of your perimeter at 2 a.m. Be ready, boys." And sure enough, they would try a probe at 2 a.m. and just to test. And they were actually digging underneath us. And I heard that they actually at one point came up inside the perimeter, and there was some kind of battle that took place from shooting the guys that had dug a tunnel. But I remember seeing eventually the trench line of the enemy was right outside our wire, about 20 yards. And you could see them digging. And so you would call in a napalm strike or something, and they would disappear and then come back up and keep digging. So it was pretty exciting. Interesting too is that sometimes Hanoi Hannah would know things about our guys. So she might say, you know, "Joe, your girlfriend Rena is going out with Jody," or whatever the name was, and they would have information. Somebody in the United States was helping them to give stuff that would try to demoralize the troops. During this time, I mean, even before, when I got to Con Thien and kept getting promoted because everybody was getting killed, I assumed I was going to be killed. And I had that thought that I was going to be killed. It stayed with me throughout my whole year in Vietnam. I didn't lose it. Even the day that I left, I still, when I got on the plane at Da Nang, I thought, sure is going to hit now on the runway. And I was surprised when I didn't get killed. That was a good thing to not get killed, basically. Here's a plane flying low over Khe Sanh, and you can see it's a pretty jumbled up mess. These hooches were before the real siege started. Everything had to go into bunkers. These were buildings that it was sort of a normal base until things started getting heated up during the 68 Tet Offensive. And the records were that we were surrounded by something like 40,000 North Vietnamese regular troops. And on this base, we had 7,000 Marines. So our battalion of 1,000 was one of them, one of the battalions. Mostly the 26 Marines were manning this perimeter. And they had been there before us, and they had been manning the hills and starting to getting action. And then they currently have an organization where they meet. It's called the Khe Sanh Veterans Organization. And then this is a picture of me digging my bunker. This is after about 30 days. So if you can see in back of me, that's a bunker, and I'm just working on filling sandbags. And what happened was, one of the guys that, if you see in back of me there, there's a guy standing up with his bunker in back of him, straight in back of me. Well, his bunker took a direct hit, and he wasn't in the bunker at the time, but took a direct hit. So he wound up having to move into my bunker. And so I had to create a little duplex out the side of the trench. So we shared a bunker for a while. Let me switch to, this was taken down on the runway, near the runway, waiting to get onto a plane. So like these bags of mail were going out to be mailed home, and then we would get guys that would jump off the plane and bring us mail bags. So we did get some mail out there. One of the things that when I was in Con Tien, after we left, I was there 47 days on Con Tien, and after we left, we got back to the rear, and they gave us clean uniforms and some hot chow, and gave us all our mail, which they hadn't been delivering. So we had about a month's worth of mail. And I had the company of 200, which at that time I was senior corpsman. So now I'm in charge of the whole medical of the company. At that time, the company got 2 mail bags delivered, and one of them was for me. So I had a really supportive family. They were sending care packages all the time. But the problem was, here I had a whole bag full of mail, and they said, okay, we're headed back out. And I had like a half hour to go through that mail bag because there was no locker. So I had to give away everything, all the goodies. Kept some cans of sardines and hot sauce and letters. And the thing is, I got one time I got a cake from my grandma, but it was about a month late, so it was all moldy. So not all the packages were perfect, but and some were stepped on or whatever, but it was great getting mail from home. This was a sign on one of the Marines wrote on his back, "Caution, being a Marine in Khe Sanh may be hazardous to your health." And he was with the 3rd Battalion, 26th Marine Regiment. This was, I guess, shown in Newsweek. The chaplain was Chaplain Hino for us, and he was there sometimes. When he wasn't there, sometimes I was like the chaplain. I would hold services, and I would go around, and if whatever the guys had needs, I would, basically I had pretty much some experience with an organization called Campus Crusade for Christ. And Charlene, my wife, was on staff for that year that I was in Vietnam. So anyway, Chaplain Hino, he befriended me, and so I got a chance to hang out with him a lot. And I made this plaque for him. This is actually something I made on metal for him and sent it to him. Now this was a hill that was right outside the main base of Quezon, a quarter mile out. And I told you that that first platoon that I was originally assigned to, that hill was manned by those guys of first platoon plus some additional guys. So there was a total of 64 people on the hill. But at night they got overrun. So they were in real trouble, and most of their bunkers were taken over by the enemy, and 28 of them, like I said, were killed in that battle, 28 of our guys. And then there was something like 300 and there was 150 enemy bodies that they left behind. So during this battle, I was having to crawl through trenches that were full of bodies, and I was working on wounded. And finally, this is right after the battle, I got my camera out, took a picture. They were digging out one of the Marines, and I had to go inside the bunker and work on him, but unfortunately he didn't last very long. He was already in shock. And anyway, the thing is, these guys, it was a hard time for me. That was probably the worst day of my, not probably, that was the worst day of my time in Vietnam. This is a list of the guys that were killed from first platoon. And so in the Vietnam Memorial, they have a whole section. Everybody is listed by date. So if you know some particular date, you can go look at that date, and that all these names will be in the same panel of the Vietnam Memorial. Now the corpsman was very important to the Marines, and the enemy would try to hit the company commander and the radio man and the corpsman in that order, because those are vital services. The corpsman had to react quickly, and it was messy. You didn't know all the time if you were going to help a guy. But I learned later that if we could get a guy onto a chopper, he had a 95% chance of survival. So that was good news. I found out that later. So here's a little meme, Doc, because even grunts need heroes. And the Marines do honor their corpsmen. They, especially if you were in combat, the Marines appreciate the corpsmen very much. Then this was a picture on the left was a Christmas tree I got. So when we got back to the rear after, actually, this was after Con Tien battle. That was 47 days. So then during the December, we were at Camp Evans, and I hope I get this right, it was Camp Carroll first, I think, and then it became Camp Evans when the Army took the base over, and they paved the roads and put in really nice chow halls. And so I got a chance to go in their chow hall once in a while and get some good food. Compared to the Marine Corps food, it was almost better sometimes to eat sea rations rather than go to the chow hall. And that's what a lot of guys did. They just skipped the chow hall. This picture on the right is me the last day, and the plane in the background. We're all getting ready to go, and I had this one souvenir of I'm not sure what they call the kind of hat, but basically I was really happy to get out of there. We had one problem when you're getting short, you're a short timer, you start worrying that you might actually survive. And so they actually have a calendar they give you. It's a short timer's calendar. And a lot of times it's just a woman with the numbers going around and around her until it ends up on a certain spot. I'm not going to elaborate, but we were very glad to get to this point. And I told you I had even thought that I was going to get it on this flight. And the problem with having a thought like that in your mind, it stays with you. And so even years later, I would look in the mirror. If I had a thing on my face that looked like a cancer or something, I would think, oh, okay, great. Now I'm going to die from that. So basically, the PTSD kind of messes you up. Here's a little meme. The 1,000-yard stare meets the 2-yard stare. The guy just coming in, he's all green. The guy leaving, he's got this stare on his face. And if he made it that far, he's one of the lucky ones. So, okay, the Vietnam vets, no yellow ribbons, no parades, no respect. And that was really a sad thing. I'm glad we don't ever do that to our veterans anymore. The veterans, this was 68 at the peak of the protest stuff, and they were waiting at the airport for us and throwing pennies and spitting, calling us names and stuff. So everybody was pretty much went into hiding. And I know I wound up, I didn't tell anybody that I had been to Vietnam almost 20 years. I didn't talk about it, and I had sort of forgotten. But the thing you don't forget is your various things of PTSD. And that was one of the second war that I was talking about, the war against PTSD. And this is shortly after I came home. Just as an example, I was driving with a friend of mine on El Cajon Boulevard in San Diego, and I heard a noise and I jumped under the steering wheel. And that's not a good driving procedure from what I've heard. I was underneath there, and Bill, my friend, said, "Rod, put on the brake." He grabbed the wheel and I, put on the brake, and I apologized for my bad driving. In Quezon, we were on 24-hour alert for 77 days. So they said, don't go to sleep at night because you could get overrun. So we basically stayed alert. Now, if you think that's not possible, ask some of the guys from Quezon. I laid there in my bunker with one eye open and my .45 pistol in my hand across my chest. And literally, that's how I rested at night. And I could hear a twig snap. You didn't want to be asleep if the ground attack is happening. So that one eye open situation stayed with me for about 20 years too. People would walk up to me, they'd see my eye open, they'd think I was awake. And if they just touched me on the chest, that was a bad thing to do because my hand would immediately be up on their throat and I'd have them up against the closet door. So people learned to not wake me up that way. They would make a lot of noise at my feet, maybe touch my feet, just to get me to wake up in a proper manner. During that time of PTSD, I went to group meetings, and those were very helpful. I got a psychologist that was helpful for counseling, and sometimes they had anger management class. Now, I don't know who invented anger management class, but think about this. You take 10 angry guys and you put them in one room, and what do you think is going to happen? It's like you have anger. And I flunked out of anger management 4 times. And I won't tell you the stories, but it's easy to flunk out. And this is another brilliant thing. Sometimes they would add 5 Marines and 5 Army guys in the same room. And it's, Marines love Army, I'm sure they do, but they also do have a little bit of rivalry. So it adds to the anger management. They found medications that help me to get to sleep, because I had a real problem when I would first sleep. I was afraid of falling asleep, and usually that's when I would have a flashback or a nightmare. It wouldn't take much. I would see a pile of clothes on the floor, and I would think that was the enemy coming to get me. I'd start yelling, and sometimes I'd be choking my wife. She had to tell me, "It's me, Rod, it's me." So basically, PTSD was pretty strong, and it took me, it took me a long time to really get control. And a lot of guys didn't get control, and they wound up in jail, or they had guys that were called tripwire guys that were part of the homeless crew, that, and some were even so wary of contact with you that they were hiding in bushes out in the woods and stuff. So PTSD was a real thing. One of my favorite things that I seemed to do all the time was self-sabotage, and that's when you have an opportunity, like for a job here in Temecula. I had an interview before it was Abbott Labs. It was called ACS, and then it became Guidant. But I asked the personnel guy asked me, what is the most important thing about working here at ACS? And here it was, a job that I was perfectly qualified for. I had all the perfect background. I would have been a shoo-in. And all I could say was, well, when are the coffee breaks? To what is the most important thing? So I didn't get that interview. And later I did get to work there. And basically, self-sabotage. One of my last jobs, I never had an actual real job till the very end of my career. I worked contract for 30 years. So I would have 2 weeks or a month or 3 months. I managed to sabotage a job I had at NASA up in Pasadena. I had a Vietnamese supervisor, and one day I just told him, I said, you know, I think I may have killed your father. And it's crazy. It's a dumb thing to do. Why did I do that? I don't know, but it's called self-sabotage. Now, the problem is there's 22 veterans that will commit suicide every day, and various reasons of their anger. So basically, if you know a veteran, you know, try to help them out and make sure they're doing okay. Ask them if everything's all right. But you know, that is a pretty high rate. It's actually more than what happens in most of the combat in Afghanistan and whatever, Iraq or Somalia, wherever. Okay, and the third war I need to talk to you about is the Agent Orange. Now, one of the things that the Vietnam, the gift that keeps on giving, they sprayed Agent Orange to defoliate the jungle. The problem is we had to go through the jungle that was being defoliated, and so this gooey stuff of dissolved leaves would drip on us, and we would be out in the bush for maybe 2 weeks with this stuff on in our clothing, on our back. And when I came back, I had a real horrible case of acne on my back. They call that chloracne, and at the time they didn't diagnose it as Agent Orange. And 14 years ago, I got cancer from Agent Orange. I didn't know it, but my local doctor was just telling me, oh, it's just viral bronchitis. And so he took x-ray. I didn't take an x-ray. He gave me antibiotics, and nothing worked. I kept getting, it was harder and harder to breathe. And my friend told me, it's actually Bill, the same friend that had told me that he had to grab the wheel. He told me to get into the emergency room and get an x-ray. And I think he knew what was going on. So I got an x-ray on a Monday. I went down to the La Jolla VA. I got an x-ray, and as I'm driving home, they said, Mr. Fink, you've got to get back here right away. And so I got back there on Friday, and because I basically couldn't even breathe, my friend said, go to the emergency room now. So Friday I went back, and they said, it's a good thing you came back. You had a year to live. I mean, sorry, you had a week to live. And they basically started me on chemo. I had 5 months of chemo. They shipped me up to Seattle with Charlene for a bone marrow transplant. That's a 3-month procedure. And I'm for 13 years, I believe, in remission from that. Okay, The Walking Dead, the movie of The Walking Dead, those aren't the real Walking Dead. We are the real Walking Dead. And we may have left Vietnam, but Vietnam has never left us. That was a saying, I'm not sure. Anyway, this is a shot of some of my buddies from 2016. This was in Reno, Nevada. This was the battalion reunion we had in Reno. Most of the guys in Reno have a Purple Heart, and many are very distinguished medal, Silver Star, Bronze Star. We had guys from our battalion with the Medal of Honor. Amazing group of guys. They're called the Walking Dead. This is a shot of the wall, and I did a couple of visits to the wall during the time. One of the projects I've been doing, I have a printing business where I print onto metal. So I print these metal images, and this is the only part of it that's a commercial. This is 1/3 of the pictures I did over at the VFW. I have two other parts of the wall that I've done photos for them. And basically anything of custom work and metal, I can do it. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So thank you all. I'm going to stop sharing now. We can go on to questions if anyone has a question.
Thank you so much. That was just wonderful to have you share such difficult service. There are a couple of questions here that maybe we can start with in the chat. And while I do that, then I'll try to figure out how to unmute you all.
How to what?
How to unmute everybody so they can ask.
Well, I guess oh, that's true. They would have to click on it.
Yes, I know. I think I just have to go.
How about if they raise their hand if they want to unmute?
Okay, now I think I said that you can unmute yourselves. So
okay.
Questions was, who took the pictures of the guys in the trenches? Was that the Stars and Stripes also?
That wasn't necessarily Stars and Stripes, but I'm sure they covered it, but it was Time and Newsweek, different reporters that were there. There's so many books written about it. I didn't go into details, but as far as movies that I think would relate to my time in Vietnam, that would be the one I know the most would be Platoon, except there wasn't the drama of the two sergeants or doing anything nasty. But I saw stuff in Full Metal Jacket that I could relate to, and Apocalypse Now, but basically Platoon was the movie that was most relevant to me. And the pictures that you can go online, if you just type in Quezon or whatever, you'll see hours and hours of photos from different sources.
Another question came from Gary Levine. Ron, thanks for sharing your PTSD experience. How much help was the VA?
The VA was a tremendous amount of help, and I wouldn't have made it without the VA. Basically, the medications that the doctors tried on me, and the ones that worked that I took for years, especially the one to get me to sleep, and they would try things that they take your emotions away, and I don't like those so much. So I didn't last very long on the ones. They make you a little bit of a zombie, but it really helps to make you not angry or any problems with you, but it's not very pleasant.
Ron,
Yeah, the
excuse me.
VA help was tremendous.
Ron,
Yeah.
it's Gary Levin. I was in Vietnam in the Navy from 1968 to 1970.
Uh-huh.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sure.
So we did some things the same, except I was much safer on a naval ship. But after the Vietnam War, I remember, I'm a retired physician, I remember hearing that the VA did not consider PTSD a veteran's benefit for a long time. Did you run into a problem with that?
Right. Well, we didn't, at least the troops didn't talk about it much. And it took about 10 years for me to really go full bore. I would say not crazy, but I would go through the house at night and check windows and doors several times and shake my kids because they looked like they were dead. So that was pretty crazy. And at that point, I was really in need of some counseling and help. That was about 10 years after the war. So the VA covered, well, I'm going to say the Army didn't say they did much about Agent Orange for quite a while because of would have been a lot of liability. They finally did, but there's a book about it called Waiting for an Army to Die. And I read that book and realized that there was stuff that they didn't handle well. But now they've really picked up their game. And I think if you have a condition that was Agent Orange and made a claim, you have a better chance of getting it now.